Okay, we are recording now. Today is, what is today? October 29th. And this is the Velero community meeting. Our fiercely leader is out sick today, Steve Chris, wishing him well. And we have an agenda here to cover. Let's see, let's start by announcing that we released our version 1.2 beta last week. We, as always, yay. We appreciate any testing and feedback and bug reports and all of that. So please let us know. And if you are using it and everything goes well, let us know too. Let's move on to status updates. I am working on updating the Helm charts and documentation. The documentation there is a bit lacking. So hopefully overall that's going to be better, and the Helm chart is going to reflect the changes that we made for 1.2. And the major change there is that the images for plugins need to be added to the installation, because now it's not part of Velero code base. Adnan, do you want to go over your status updates?
Sure, yeah, I don't have much for this week. I was basically just testing the 1.2.0 beta 1 on AWS, and also testing some more CSI stuff as well.
Cool. Nolan, welcome back from vacation.
Thank you. I don't have a whole lot to report on, mostly just catching up. I know I don't think Scott's on the call, but Scott was asking about a PR I have open for waiting for CRDs to be ready before continuing with Restore. I don't know if that will get into the 1.2.0 or 1.2.0. But we'll see. I don't think it would be a major change, but we'll see. I need to test that and also work on testing the beta. And I'll link to that issue in a second.
Cool.
Yeah, the code looked good to me on that PR. I think you weren't ready to merge it because you wanted to test it more, I guess.
Yeah, and I saw your comment about a rebase, which I did. I had rebased it, but I had an old checkout of master, so I needed to fetch master and rebase on that. So I'm going to get that fixed up, and so it won't have that extraneous type diff.
Cool.
So that's it for status updates on our end. I wonder if anybody on the call has any questions, comments. So we have a couple topics for discussion, but they're both added here by Steve, and he's not on the call. So just to give a heads up, yes, this one, we've been discussing this, and we need to come to a conclusion because we need to take an action here. But there are so many different ways that this could go, and Steve definitely should be part of the conversation. I don't know, Nolan, Adnan, do you want to add any highlights to this right now without, we know we're not going to reach an agreement right now?
I read over it briefly, and I get, like, it looks like all of us, or everyone that's commented so far is a little conflicted, because essentially this looks like if you're asking Velero to back up an invalid state. If there's no volume there, then Velero will happily move on and call the backup partially failed.
Yeah, so let me give a brief on this issue. So a Velero backup as well as a restore. Let's say, start with a backup. A backup can be complete, which was successful. It can be failed. So maybe failed validation. There are specific things that cause it to be marked as failed. And then there's partially failed, which might be, oh, it didn't upload to S3 or some other reasons that are different from failed. And then if that backup is partially failed, is it or is it not proper to restore from it? Would it still be desirable to restore from a failed backup? So we have users saying, yes, we want to do that. But then do we make it so it's the default? Do we put a flag for people to mark? Hey, I want to get whatever was the last backup, if it was complete or partially failed, just restore from it, it's fine. Or do we make it aromatic? But then our question is, well, if there was a resource missing, if etcd is telling us that this resource should be there, like let's say a PVC, someone correct me if I'm wrong on the details, but let's say a PVC should be there, and then we try to back up, and the PVC is just not there, it's going to trigger that backup is going to be marked as partially failed. Should we just mark it as, in repeating myself here, but should that be okay? Because is Velero supposed to validate that the resources, everything is there as it should? Or should Velero not care about that and just back up? And if there were no errors per se, because if a resource should be there but wasn't there, we can't back it up. So we could just proceed as normal and say, well, this is an okay backup. The flip side of that is that a user might be thinking, oh, these are the resources that I should have in my cluster, but then that one particular one or multiple wasn't there. And they think they have a full backup, but they don't. So how do we accommodate all of those concerns?
If you guys don't mind, I can give you my opinion. This is Michael.
Oh, we would love opinions, yes.
So I think, yeah, you kind of differentiate the two things very nicely. So there's the cases where the data was there and we failed to back them up, at which point that's a pretty big problem, right? So that's when Velero should indicate a failure, where data was there and we failed to get them, because that also means your business continuity cannot be met because you can't restore from it. And then there's a second case where someone asks us to back up something that doesn't exist. So we're not making any worse for them. Since you couldn't back it up, you also can't restore it, but they're no worse off than when they started because they didn't have the data to begin with. At that point, I do agree that it's a somewhat gray area where Velero did what it was supposed to do, but we started with a fail state and we also resulted in a fail state later on. I have a couple of questions, I guess, before I kind of answer this. Is it possible that Velero can do a quick sanity check before we start the backup so that we let them know that something is missing, that we won't be able to back something up? Like, think of this as a pre-flight check that Velero can run across the board of the environment and say, yes, everything that API tells me it's supposed to be there is there.
Like a scanner.
Like a scanner, that's right. So we could flag our errors there, that is like indicate to them that this could not be backed up. I mean, I see the point that Steve is bringing here on this item, right? So if someone added automation on top of Velero, every time he gets a partially failed, all alarms kind of start ringing and say, okay, what did not get backed up in my environment that I need to worry about, because the business depends on it.
Yeah, that's the thing, that most people want to automate the system. So running a scanner sort of not very much automated, is it?
Well, no, I mean,
have to check.
We've talked about having a 2-pass system on our backup. So we take our resource selection criteria and like say, okay, this is enumerate everything that would be selected by this. and then do a filter on that. But currently, we go and look at each item individually once. So we don't have a pre-flight or a two-step process.
Yeah.
Currently.
No,
That
but
would
I think
help here.
But I think that if we had a scanner, I'm not against having a scanner. And I remember now that you mentioned it, Nolan, that we did talk about this before. We have been thinking about this. Not all the time, every once in a while it pops up. The thing of doing a one pass before backing things up and just gathering everything that should be imaginary against the cluster manifest. But I think we fall into the same question. What do we do with it? What do we do in the case of like the manifest is saying this resource should be there, but then it isn't? How do we automate this decision? Like,
yeah. Can I ask a second question? If we fail to back something up, like let's say a persistent volume is there, but we fail to back them up for whatever reason, is it still partially failed, or is it failed in that case?
no, it's failed.
Oh, it's failed. So anytime we fail anything, it's always failed. If for any reason any resource cannot be backed up, it's always failed. But partially failed is only there if something was referenced but it doesn't exist. That's the only case that you have partially failed.
That's one case that I can think of. Another case is everything was backed up, but we couldn't upload the backup to the S3 buckets. That's also partially failed because we did back things up, but we couldn't deliver, so it's partially failed. There might be a couple. There might be other. I can't think of any other cases.
Okay.
I'm wondering what happened.
The main distinction here is, here's this backup is totally useful, totally reflective of the cluster manifest.
Yeah, so I'm thinking
is totally unusable. And then we have something in the middle. It's like, yeah, this might be useful. Like, for example, in the case that we can upload it to S3, it's useful, but it's just not there available because it didn't upload.
Yeah, so that's why I was thinking maybe we need to, maybe we can rename the state, right? So failed is everything, things failed. Like you couldn't, I think that if you couldn't upload to S3 or to the bucket, that should be failed in my personal opinion, because the backup, it doesn't exist for the customer. So if you're an admin that automated it, you don't have peace of mind if it didn't get uploaded to S3. And I think in this specific situation where we did everything that Velero did everything that it was supposed to do, but the data just wasn't there to where they were instructed to do, then maybe that's not partially failed, but that's basically limited success or partially successful. Because you were successful, you didn't fail. It's just that it's limited because certain things were missing because they were never there to begin with. So it may be worthwhile, and this is me brainstorming, that we can identify all the cases where partially failed was basically signaled, and I couldn't upload to S3 could either be partially failed or totally failed because the intent of the customer or the user was not met. So that's a failure. And then maybe the case where artifacts were missing from the beginning, that's a limited success or a partial success. So kind of a little bit a different way of phrasing it to the user, so where we can tell them that, hey, if this thing wasn't there to begin with, we still succeeded, but it's partial success. It's up to you to decide if you want to ignore it or not, and fix your API objects. But it's okay if you don't, because whatever we backed up, we'll also be able to restore, and that was your entire environment.
I think so. That's a good solution to make things more, like, for us to recognize better, like, because we're using better words to describe the situation. But then we still have another question, and we didn't mention this here. I didn't mention it here, so I'm going to mention it now.
Okay.
What do we do at the time? What do we do at the time of restore? Because when we automate when people automate the restore, they fetch the last successful backup, the last complete backup. So are we going to now say, well, you can automate it, so, because that's what people are asking. So if it's complete or partially successful, do we let people restore partially successful? Or maybe they could choose why I want partially successful, and people say I would maybe have a flag there that people can say, no, exclude partially successful. I don't want to risk it. I just want a complete or nothing. And that's like this whole package is what we're looking at, because if we twist one knob here, we have to, they go together.
Yeah, no, I understand. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask. So this particular issue that's on the screen links to 1858, and I see the last comment there says that we added a allow partially failed flag to Velero restore. So that sounds to me like what you were just talking about, Carlicia. Is that correct?
I think that was a stopgap solution for now, though. I don't know if we want to keep that in long term.
Yeah. So Steve, I think he added a flag. Was that the end result of this?
Yeah. So he added a flag to Velero restore. Like it looks like this particular customer, for whatever reason, all their backups are partially failed. Because reading their comment, it said that, well, if we only restore completed backups, we would never be able to use from schedule. Which is strange to me. I don't know why their environment is always partially failed, but
yeah, that's the question. Like, for example, do we want Velero to be a validation tool? Adnan made this case. I think Steve also made this case. Do we want Velero to be a validation tool? Do we want Velero to be saying, well, the manifest says this resource is there, but we're validating that it isn't there, so let's just partially fail this backup? Or do we want Velero just to be a plain backup tool? If it's there, we back up. If it's there and we fail to back up, it's failed. If it's there, if it's not there, and we attempted to back up and it's not there, it's a complete backup. We don't need to validate the resources. And because if we, on the other side of this issue is the restore, because our concern is if like I said, but just like giving a whole picture end to end, trying here. If we don't validate, if we back up what's there, maybe something's supposed to be there, but it isn't. But hey, Velero is not a validation tool. If we take that stand that Velero is not a validation tool, we say, well, this backup is complete because we backed up everything that was there. And then people rely on that. Well, this is a fine backup, it's a complete backup, and they restore. And then later down the road, they look at it and say, well, why is this thing missing? It should be there. It's sort of like, it's misleading for me personally. I think it's like, it can be misleading. We can be giving people a false sense of security.
Right. Well, and that's kind of what, like, I like that this throws up a flag at the backup time, because I honestly don't know that we can make the right decision 100% of the time. It sounds like we have one user who is fine with it, but like, I'm honestly not sure how a restore would work if the PVC is non-existent. Like,
I was gonna ask what happens there. Like, do we create the pod and basically link it to a PVC that we never created?
Right, because I would think, having just read this morning, I would think this would result in a hanging restore, because the pod would never get started.
Okay.
But I think that would be the case when it was backed up as well, right? The pod would just be in a pending state.
But that pod, though, could reference other things that were created and config. And in this case, we're not creating all of those things, right? Because we won't be able to create them.
Right. Yeah, like, to me, it's asking, okay, if we back up an invalid state, can we restore a valid state? And like, I don't think we can, because let's say we skip the items that are not found. We then have to update the manifests to not point to them, or we'll get in the same scenario when we restore. like even if we omit the PVC from the backup, when we restore, that pod's still going to have a reference to it.
I'm just wondering if there's a case for a late bound intention here. So if I were to back up a pod that references a PVC that doesn't exist and then restore that in another cluster that does have that PVC, or I later then create that PVC, then eventually it'll get bound. I don't know if that's a real use case, but
well, I mean, eventually also your backup will succeed if they put it in there.
yeah.
So it kind of goes along with that. So
That's true.
I'm more inclined to say that it's not partially failed. This is just failed. Yeah, I think partially failed gives you that false sense of security that certain things succeeded. I mean, it's okay to have a failure that basically tells you exactly what things failed, right? And in some cases, it could be I failed to upload to the S3 bucket, or in some other cases, I failed to back up everything. And if we're crystal clear about what failed, then they can go back and fix it or identify what happened. But in both of those cases, the intent is not met.
Yeah, and I think trying to remember back to the discussion about the partially failed and having that kind of intermediate status was this particular, in this instance with this particular pod, wouldn't be useful, but everything in the backup that's not referring to it, let's say you got a bunch of namespaces and this happened to be the one deployment / pod in that the whole cluster that couldn't do it. The rest of it's valid, but that particular one isn't, which I think there's definitely debate. It's definitely debatable on, okay, well, since we didn't get 100% of things, is it complete or is it not? Like I can see that there's arguments both ways there.
Yeah, because let's think if it takes a while for you to either change the manifest to remove that reference or add the resource in there, if it takes a while, that time is a lost opportunity to create backups if we keep failing the backup. But if you weren't failing the backup, those backups could still be very useful if people needed to recover that cluster, because it's like in one sense it failed, but in another sense it didn't fail the backup, because if it wasn't there, we didn't fail to back up something that wasn't there.
No, but
that backup could be useful. That's like, we think a lot about this too. Like,
yeah.
How can we make it so we're not restricting the usability of the backup?
Well, I understand, but when you get a failure like that, you don't have to stop the backup, right? You can continue all the operations of Velero and put even try to push them into the S3 bucket. It would just be a failed backup. So that doesn't make it any less useful. Like when the operator goes and looks at the log, he will see that the only thing that failed in this backup was basically this object that this pod that basically was referring to something that non-existed. And I say, okay, this is still a good backup. If something happened and I need to restore, I could still use this because there's only one thing missing from it, right? So the log tells you what's missing. So that doesn't make it any less useful. But what it does tell him is if he has automation, it gives him the clear signal that everything that you asked me to do, I couldn't do. And reliability is one of the biggest things that you expect from a backup tool, right? It either needs to work 100%, or anything less than 100, it means it didn't work, because that means someone needs to take a look at something, or I don't have 100% confidence that everything I had at point time A, I can restore at my recovery point time.
Yes.
And that's what backup tools are supposed to do.
That's a good point. And for that reason, I like having the middle states, because if we have that middle states where, well, there was really not like a technical failure, there was like a conceptual failure. Let's say, well, if conceptually this was supposed to be there, but it wasn't, but we technically didn't fail. So having the partially failed or partially successful would exclude the need for going through like failed backups. So the admin, the operator wouldn't, well, I'm not going to look at the failed backup because they failed. I don't need to So I'm going to limit my search to, okay, let's see what this partially failed. It's telling me if it's recoverable.
Yeah, I would say that a failed backup is absolutely not recoverable, i.e. we couldn't upload it to
Yeah, so
S3.
having that distinction is useful.
Whereas partially failed is something that I could potentially restore from. There might be something missing there, or I need to go and check the logs and see what's wrong with that backup.
Right.
So,
Yeah. I
but
think
it's
we
not
just-
partial fail, right? It's partially successful. If you call it partially
Yeah.
failed, then
Yeah.
you give them the negative connotation. So in this specific case, I would call this partial success because we did everything in Velero's power to complete the backup. If you fail to upload to S3 and you guys called it partially failed earlier, that's why I want to change that to make it completely failed, because that's a failure.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that is a failure.
I think Alicia mentioned earlier that that's partially failure, but yeah, we could look into that. But yeah, like
what did you say, Nolan?
When we fail to upload S3, I think that is a complete failure.
It's a partial. No, it's a partial. I'm pretty sure.
You mark that as partial failure?
I'm pretty sure.
That's okay. That seems
wrong, but
wrong.
Pretty sure.
Okay.
I could be wrong though.
Okay. I guess. Let's see.
By the way, guys, I need to jump. I have a sick Windows meeting in a little bit, but I'm gonna start attending all the Velero meetings. And yeah, I never introduced myself either, but I'm gonna be the new PM for Velero, so I'll basically I'll be basically spending a lot more time on Velero, picking up from Tom.
Oh wow, cool.
Okay.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Michael. That was great feedback right off the bat. So.
Yeah, so sorry about that. They were hoping Steve was gonna be here, but as soon as you said he's sick, I said like, oh, bummer. I guess I'll start attending all of your meetings as well, so I'll be more involved in the project from now on.
Cool.
Thanks for the input.
Thank you. Yeah.
No problem. And unfortunately, my Kubernetes meeting for Sick Windows, which is another community I chair this, is right in the middle of this meeting. So I'll only be able to attend the first half an hour every week. Cool. All right. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks, Michael.
Right. And I think something Adnan and Michael said here is probably the most important part. Is regardless of whether we call this middle state partially failed or partially completed or whatever we name it, I think it makes sense to make sure we're crystal clear on what parts of the backup we encounter trouble with. Making sure those are easily findable via our tools and automation. I think that might be the bigger thing versus trying to intelligently like skip 404 errors. I think it might be better to log them and surface them in a way that both people and tools can consume.
Yeah, ultimately, I think, the cluster operator is going to have to decide whether something that's missing is actually a problem or not. And we just have to make that visible and easy for someone to decide. And I think documentation here on saying, okay, failed means something that can't be recovered. Partial fail means, or partial successful, whatever we end up calling it, means you need to go in and check if this is actually a complete backup or not, and then decide whether you want to restore it or not. So I think with that, we'd probably want to keep the flag or have some sort of mechanism to allow people to restore partially failed backups. But then failed backups can absolutely not be restored. The other thing I would check here is what happens with restic, because if the pod isn't running and there's no PVC attached to it and we're trying to back up that PVC, that's not going to work. I don't know how. I'm assuming that's going to end up in a failed state because the restic backup didn't complete. But we'd have to check that.
I would say let's table this conversation.
Yeah.
We're going to have to circle back to this. Let's keep thinking about it. And if anybody wants to add ideas to the ticket, definitely do that.
And I'm just going to clarify. I was looking through the backup controller because I was real curious on what happens when we fail to upload. We do mark it as phase failed.
Oh, it's failed?
Yeah, because there's no tarball that we could use. There's a
thanks for that.
Yeah, there's a Kubernetes. There's a backup CR in Kubernetes, but there's no tarball that we could extract if we fail to upload.
All right. Thanks for that, Nolan.
Yep.
I was so sure. All right. So
Actually,
thanks for making.
I have a question regarding the, the backup table and the failure for that. So I noticed that when you're doing a restore, let's say you run into any errors or warnings with the restore, Velero will actually create, I think in the S3 bucket, you'll have like a results.zipped file there, which contains all the warnings and errors that were encountered during the restore, right? So for the backup though, it seems like we are not doing something similar to that. I noticed that if I have any backups that, let's say, are partially failed or with some warnings, I really have to go and look at the Velero, the pod logs for that. So is there like a reason why that was designed that way, or have you guys thought about doing a similar thing for the the way we're doing the restore? Because if you're thinking of having like an automated system that's basically triggering, or even a pipeline that triggers the backups, then being able to pass a file like that would be helpful, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with the backup was that, so in the early days of Velero, we actually put the entire log on the backup CR, and what we found was that would overflow the size of objects in etcd. So the backup CR could potentially get too big to store in etcd, and then that would cause all kinds of problems. So the challenge is, if we can't upload the log to S3, then we have limited ways of communicating that.
I see, yeah.
So if the failure mode is, hey, we can't communicate with S3 or whatever the bucket is at all, then we need at the very least a way to signal that.
Right.
But if a backup can get up to S3, then the bucket, then it should also have those logs with it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, I think for the case where the upload to S3 fails, then it's really hard to. You basically have to look at the logs for that.
Yeah. Hi, Cecilia. This is Yun Chen. I have a question about the plugin, because from the latest, because I knew that Velero has just released the beta version on last Friday, right? And besides, right, I found that the AWS and Azure and the GCP, previously they are inside of the binary of Velero, but right now we need to explicitly to specify it as a plugin when you install it.
That's correct.
So,
yeah.
But I found that when I type the Velero plugin and then add the image of the AWS, and then it shows up an error. I don't know why. But when I try to directly install Velero into the Kubernetes cluster, I mean, when I try to install Velero and then I add the flag plugins, that would be successful. I mean,
what error did you get when you use the plugin ads?
I mean, when I type the Velero install and then I add the plugins at that time.
So the Velero install with the flag plugins worked.
Yeah.
So the Velero plugin ads did not work.
Yeah.
Do you remember the error you got?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah. Because plugin basically is a command, right? Plugin.
Yeah, it's a command. Yeah, Velero plugins. And then there is Velero plugins add, Velero plugins remove, Velero plugins get, which will list out all the plugins. Okay. It will be helpful. Do you have access to the Slack channel?
Yeah.
Do you mind, we can follow up with you outside of the meeting. Do you mind dropping it there?
Okay. I will do that after a while.
Thank you so much. We'll definitely look into it. Should work, but works on my machine.
It's Windows, Linux.
Yeah, okay. All right, we'll definitely look into it. The next thing on the discussion topics is Helm charts. Don't know what Steve had in mind. I'm not even going to attempt. Adnan, do you have an idea what, I mean, the documentation needs to be improved. Do you have any idea what Steve had in mind?
I think it was that. I think it was from the conversation that we had yesterday, where a lot of things in the chart readme was just very confusing. So if you're already tackling that, then that's great. Yeah, we can see when Steve comes back if he has anything else to add on that. We can follow up with him.
Yeah. We have a question here from Rob H. Rob Hart. Hey, Rob, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah. So with the latest version, you guys are showing off plugins for AWS and Google and whatnot. We have persistent volumes in our OpenStack clusters, and we're currently using Cinder. So there's really not an easy way to do that without using resting. But Cisco did develop a plugin for the Cinder volumes, and we were just curious if that was going to be included in your repository where you're keeping the plugins for AWS and Google, if that's something that Cisco should work with you guys on, or if you proactively seek those out to include. We're just kind of looking at the future of that.
So what we are trying to do is maybe the intention of separating the plugins was one of the intentions. There were many intentions, but one of it was maybe onboard people who can be eventually maintainers of those plugins. And we want to be more focused on the Velero core. So the answer to that is no. I don't know if it's an answer you like. What we are going to be diligent about is having in our documentation links to every plugin that's maintained by the community. So the idea here is that you have that on your own repository somewhere, and we will include a link to that in our documentation.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, we were just kind of looking at our level of effort that we would need to get this to work in our environment.
And
yeah, we'll help you if you run into troubles. We have documentation, but we will not host it on our GitHub.
Yeah, and the Cisco plugins, I think, are not really being maintained. The last time I checked with them, they did it for their use case, but they've since moved on. So with regards to OpenStack in general, I don't think that's going to be something that we as the core team tackle. And like Carlicia said, we're kind of also looking to onboard other people with the big three providers. So right now with OpenStack, I don't know that we have the bandwidth to work on that. And the current work out there, I don't think, I'm not sure if it even works currently, but I do know it's not really actively maintained.
Okay, and hopefully we'll be moving to stuff in the near future, so I won't have to worry about it.
Okay, yeah, like I think long term, like I'm thinking like year, 2 years down the road, we start doing more CSI based work, and the providers have that support, and we won't have to worry as much about it. But with the state of things as they are, there's not, besides the Cisco OpenStack plugins, I don't think there's really an option at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. And just to add to that, if we make exceptions for one, we have to make it a rule for everyone. And once it's in our GitHub organization, then we give the impression that we are responsible for that, and it's can get to be quite a lot. Anyway,
Right,
moving on.
absolutely.
Yeah, hopefully it's understandable. We are at the end of our session. Any question? I want to make sure people can ask questions beyond the ones that have been asked. If not, I'm going to do the usual spiel of saying you can get involved with Velero. Go to our website, velero.io. And there is an issue open. It's just going to be open for maybe forever. You can let us know how you use Velero. Go to our, this thing needs to be updated. Go to the issue 1327 and drop a note there how you use Velero. We do have a Kubernetes Slack channel. It's #Velero. Surprise. And no contributor shout outs this week. We had a bunch last week. It was awesome. So that's it. See you all in 2 weeks. Not 2 weeks, 1 week. Oh, and also I wanted to say we are going to be at KubeCon. So meet us there if you're there.
And we're not having a meeting that week, right? Since all 4 of us are there.
Yeah, we were talking
Yeah,
about
we'll
that.
probably have to
I don't
cancel
think
it.
it makes sense.
Yeah, actually, so I just had one more thing before we ended.
Yeah.
So I actually, there was a pull request I had opened this past week, I think 1936, and that, I got a lot of help from Adnan and Steve. So I just wanted to say, thank you for the review feedback and for helping me get that in.
Thanks for the PR. I'm glad we got it in.
Of course.
Thank you guys. Yeah.
Sure. Your name is going to be in the contributor shout outs maybe next week.
Yeah, I figured just to mention it now and just say thanks to the reviewers. Maybe better now than later.
Yeah, I appreciate your thanks. All right. So goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.